The DA on this case is named Josh Markey, and he was reluctant to reopen the case for a couple of reasons. One of them being that Linda Stangel had already taken a polygraph test in relation to David's disappearance. She took the test in Minnesota at Josh Markey's request. She passed, too. He decided not to just reopen the case, but assured the police that if they could come up with a compelling reason, he would. So Bev Jones called Linda Stangel and invited her to the funeral. She really piled it on, told her that they knew how much David meant to her and it would mean so much to everyone to have her there. And Stangel thanked her for the invitation, but told her that she didn't have the money to fly all the way back to Portland at that time. Undeterred, Bev told her not to worry about the money. She said the family would pay her travel expenses, and Linda agreed to go. Bev Jones took all this information back to the police, and the plan kind of hit a snag. Remember, the police couldn't just team up with Bev Jones and make her a partner in the fact-finding process. The investigation would have bias written all over it, especially with David Walsh's mother paying for the tickets and hotel. So the police department actually bought her tickets and made her hotel arrangements, but let Bev Jones talk to Linda Stangel as if she was the one handling all of that. And so, 6 months after losing David on the trail that night, Linda hopped right on a plane and headed back to Oregon. David had his funeral, and as planned, two plainclothed state police officers approached Linda when it was over and asked if they could speak with her about the last time she saw him. When Linda agreed, the detective suggested that it would be best if they actually returned to the last place she saw him so they could get a visual of what she was talking about. Linda agreed and hopped right in the car with the cops. According to both Linda Stangel and the trial testimony of both of the police officers, both cops thanked Stangel profusely because all of this was for the family. This would give them a sense of closure and they could get past the grieving and move on to celebrating David's life. So Linda directs them to the area in the park where she'd last seen David Wahl. She demonstrated how he'd picked up the six-pack and pulled one can loose. She pointed out the direction he'd gone, and the cops began to pile on the questions and accusations. They actually kept her up there a couple of hours asking questions. They listened to her responses and then told her that nothing she said made any sense. Something must have happened up here. What is it that you're not telling us? Why'd you pack up and leave town so quickly, and why'd you take David's clothes? The cops told her they knew she wasn't a killer and that they believed whatever happened to David must have been an accident. They said, this isn't a murder investigation. If it was just an accident, just tell us it was an accident and you won't be charged with murder. And after some hemming and hawing, Linda said it was an accident. She told the detectives that she had already been thinking of going back to Minnesota because the relationship with David had run its course and the spark wasn't there anymore. She said this was mutual and that there were no hard feelings on either side. At some point during their hike, David had fake pushed her, meaning he extended his arms like he was going to push her off the cliff, but stopped before actually touching her. He was playing, meant it to be a sort of joke. Linda called him a fucker and she shoved him back hard. Her palms actually made contact with his body. David fell backwards off the cliff and completely disappeared from sight. He was standing here 1 second, she told the investigators, and just gone the next. The cops then asked Linda to reenact the scene with one of the cops standing in for David and Linda mimicking how she had pushed him. Now, this first confession wasn't recorded in any way except the detectives' memories and later their notes. It wouldn't have mattered if they had recorded it, however, because nobody had read Linda Stangel her Miranda rights. So they all got back into the car and drove to the motel where she was staying. They then turned on a tape recorder, read her Miranda rights, and questioned her again. She confessed again, this time describing a loud, annoying scream that David let out as he tumbled 400 feet before being dashed to his death on the steep, jagged rocks below. She was annoyed that this man had the audacity to scream in terror because he knew his death was just seconds away. As soon as she was finished talking, they told her to stand up, turn around, and put her hands behind her back. As they were cuffing her, Linda reminded them that they said she wasn't going to be arrested. The cops corrected her, telling her they only said she wouldn't be charged with murder. She was under arrest for manslaughter based on her own detailed confession. Linda Stangel wasn't able to make bail, so she remained in the Clatsop County Jail until her trial in January of the following year. Even if she had the money, I doubt she would have been given bail because she was from out of state. The judge could have used her lack of ties to the community as a reason to jack up the price or deny it altogether. Now, Linda Stangel was indigent. I don't know what her family situation was, but she didn't even have adequate clothing for court. She sat in court every day wearing one of her male attorney's suit jackets, which was way too big for her, over a jail t-shirt and pants. The prosecutor's case centered on the confessions that she made to the state police. The jury was never told about the polygraph test that she had passed. Most courts don't consider polygraphs reliable enough to be introduced as evidence. Stangel testified at her trial. She not only said that she had been forced into a confession, but she changed her initial story as well. On the stand, she said she'd never even gone up on the trail with David because she had an acute fear of heights. She said she had stayed behind at the bottom of the trail in her truck. She was frightened and anxious and felt the only way she was getting off that mountain and going back home again was to tell the cops what they wanted to hear. The confessions she'd given were both false and coerced. It seems strange to me that a woman that was terrified of heights would choose to go to a mountainous state park for the weekend. And granted, there are other things to do at Ecola besides hanging out on the cliffs, but remember, this was during off-season. There weren't a bunch of bonfires and parties going on down on the beach. I'm also surprised that she would just hop into the cop's car and go riding back up the mountain, including to the spot where the alleged push happened, if she was scared of heights. When questioned about taking David's shirts, Linda said there was nothing unusual about that because she always wore those shirts. Those were shirts that David didn't even wear anymore. She also reiterated the point that she hadn't run off to Minnesota. The relationship was winding down and she had been planning to go back to her friends and family anyway. Only one other witness testified for the defense, Dr. Richard Offshee, professor from UC Berkeley. And Offshee is not only a pioneer, but considered sort of a guru in the field of false confessions. His paper called The Consequences of False Confessions, Liberty and Miscarriages of Justice has been quoted for over 20 years now in cases where people claim they were coerced into giving confessions. Dr. Offshee gave a number of reasons why he believed that Linda Stangel's confession was untrue. The most compelling of them was the position of their bodies during the reenactment. According to what she told and showed the cops, they were facing each other, and neither of their backs was towards the cliff. Their sides were facing the cliff. So the most that could have happened if Linda had shoved David is that he might have stumbled backwards and fallen into some dirt. In order for David to fall off the cliff, given that positioning of their bodies, she would have had to grab him by the shoulders and throw him in a sideways motion. This expert came with a bit of baggage, however. The validity of his research has been challenged repeatedly, most aggressively in an article called The Guilty and the Innocent, an examination of alleged cases of wrongful convictions from false confessions, that was published in the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy. Professor Paul Castle wrote this piece, and in it he investigates several of the cases cited in Dr. Offshee's work. He found that Offshee relied on secondary sources instead of official material and therefore didn't even have the facts of the cases straight, and that he misstated numerous facts used to reach his conclusions. The prosecutor also gawked at Offshee's salary, which was $5,000 per day, and his clock started running the moment he left his home in Berkeley, California, and didn't stop until he got back home. Dr. Offshee testified that Linda Stangel's confession was definitely false, and that she had only said those things because of very high anxiety due to fear of heights. And with that, the defense rested. On January the 16th, 1997, Linda Stangel was convicted of second-degree manslaughter. She spoke directly to David Wahl's family at her sentencing. She said, "You know I had nothing to do with his death." She was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months in prison with 3 years of parole to follow. Her appeals were all unsuccessful, with her final appeal to the Oregon Supreme Court having been denied on July 19th in the year 2000. She was released from prison in March of 2003. The state of Oregon agreed to let her serve her parole back at home in Minnesota, and she seems to have lived a quiet life since then. Linda's ordeal with the police is still considered by many legal experts to be the poster case for false confessions to this day. If you do any research into the subject, you will certainly come across multiple references to the Stangel trial. District Attorney Josh Markey, who retired in 2018, is usually cast as the villain in these articles. The judge in this case, Paula Brownhill, has also since retired and said recently that this was one of the most memorable cases of her career. Please join me again for another True Crime Register. Thanks for listening.